right, welcome everybody to NJALA's role playing games for libraries. We're looking forward to your participation and hope you learn a lot from it. Um, I'm going to just hand you right over to Errol and John, and they're going to teach us some stuff. I'm looking forward to it. Hope you are too.
All right. Welcome everyone. This is role-playing games for libraries, running tabletop games in person virtually. We're gonna go over like a little bit of both, both concepts. The concepts of like what a role-playing game is, how do you facilitate it, the resources you might need, a bunch of that. We're gonna go back and forth, and I'll go to Errol because he's a bit more experienced than I am in some ways, and he'll explain some of the things some of the resources that I just don't have. All right. So yeah, my name is Jonathan Estrada. I am a technical project specialist at the Somerset County Library of New Jersey. I'm more or less in IT. I do a lot of technology, but I also work on facilitating programs using technology, doing a lot of being able to get people up and running with different programs and stuff like that. And I also do a lot of back end projects. So this is kind of like setting up these kind of resources is kind of my specialty. I'm also a volunteer as a game master, or for short, GM. With the nonprofit Heroes Journey, I run games, primarily D&D, in for ages around low end 10 and high end.
Oh, looks like we maybe lost John there for a minute. Okay, that's fine. If we lost John, he'll be back as soon as he gets there. um, it looks like we also lost the presentation. If you all just give me a minute to fix that. Wow, technology is here to help us.
Sorry about that.
Okay, you back, John?
Yeah, I'm back. Let
Okay.
me share again. I'm not sure what happened there. Hopefully that's not going to be a recurring thing.
Oh,
All right, can everyone see my screen again?
I can see it. But you're like, it's in a little box, John.
I was in a little box. Let me see if I can fix that.
Yeah, it's not full screen.
All right, let's do it this way. Okay. How is it now?
All right, it's still not full screen, but I think we'll get by.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and I'll just go send it on to Errol.
Sure. So my name is Errol Logan. I am the Adult Services Librarian at the Somerville branch of SCLS. I started my career here as a library assistant. I always try to keep my connection to those roots as strong as I can, because I really value the work that that I did there and that you folks do now. I'm also the executive director and one of the founders of the Heroes Journey Inc. And we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Okay. So we're going to go into the basics of like what a tabletop role-playing game is. It is a game where players role play as a character, kind of like the actors within a story, using a combination of dice to represent actions in that game. So what does that mean? Basically, a player will prompt the GM, which one player is designated as the GM, to do an action depending on the genre of game. It could be a fantasy game or a science fiction game, and they will ask, "Can I do this thing?" For if it's like a fantasy game, can I unlock this old timey door with like a lockpick? And the GM will set a artificial number in their head. Different games vary on how that process works, and if the player beats that number, they're able to do the action. The game's really built in improv, trying to interact with situations, answer things on the fly. Um, it uses like a variety of different dice sizes from D4s, D6, D20s. Some games don't even use dice, and those are a little more rely heavily on the improv side and just like saying, what do I do here? What do I do here? I use this ability. So stuff like that. So why run a TTRPG? It can be like an easy routine program to run once you've gotten the hang of it, once you've gotten all the resources set up and all of the process set, it just becomes like you just get into it and becomes very fluid. It provides a safe community for your players. It's just like a nice thing for a lot of kids and teens to just come into. It's a very relaxed situation, and usually it's very a welcoming community. Um, Next one, promoting artistic creativity and skills. I cannot emphasize this enough. Some of the kids I've run with are pretty clever. I've seen them make like potions using a combination of different like fruit juices. They've designed like little ships and maps, and we'll go into the details of why kids do that. It when you let a kid GM or be the game master, it promotes a lot of leadership skills because they have to run the game, they have to organize people, and they have to set times and schedules themselves. And just in general, it gets kids into the library, and they'll find that they overlap with other programs that they might find interest, and they might just take out some of your books because like, hey, you might have the D&D book or the Pathfinder book, and they're like, oh, and there's also other fantasy books that I might be interested in here. Errol, is there anything you want to add on to that?
Sure. So the and the value of this is really hard to overstate. The way the way that people interact in these mediums, the fact that they're talking to each other, the fact that they're making plans, the fact that they're reading, they're doing math. There's a lot of value there, not just for kids programs. One of my most popular adult programs here is my adult D&D program. So you can pick up, it attracts all ages, but you can also pick up the coveted like new adult demographic. We folks usually we lose folks when they graduate high school in libraries, and then we don't see them again until they come back with their own kids. Retaining those patrons, Dungeons and Dragons can be a big part of that. Folks that I ran team programs for still come in here for my adult programs, and they still come in and use the library on their own as adults. And these are all what we call new adults or under 30. So it can be really great and a big add to your programming.
All right. So this is like a brief list of the different TTRPGs that are like exist and are out there. We're gonna have like a few more because Errol had a few more that are like, oh yeah, those are also really good ones. Dungeons and Dragons is like the big one. Like if you hear some of your like patrons coming in and be like talking about that, they're usually talking about Dungeons and Dragons. It's almost kind of become like the Band-Aid terminology for role-playing games. Or like, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to play D&D, even though if it's not always accurate. And some of the other big ones out there are Pathfinder and Starfinder, which are also both D&D and Pathfinder are like D20 systems, and they function in a high fantasy to like space fantasy setting. Kids on Bikes is more of like a down to earth the like ET's excuse me, Stranger Things kind of like storytelling, like you were a kid like within like a 80s to like early 2000s like story setting. Lancer takes its place in like big uh Gundam mecha style storytelling. It's a very space heavy game. This one I would say is better for teens than it is for the younger groups, just because if you're using the setting as it is, it's a little heavy. But I do like it if you just like ignore the setting, you just kind of run the game mechanics as is. It is a very fun setting for a lot of patrons.
Is
Um,
that Monster of the Week, John?
I'm talking both Lancer. I was also going to
Okay.
say Monster of the Week too for this,
Okay.
but Lancer is a little more heavy. Monster Week can
Okay.
also be like that, but that one also, if you like strip away some of like the story, can be better for kids. And then Honey Heist is like a very goofy, um, silly TTRPG where you were playing as a bear and you were trying to steal honey from somewhere, and you have like stats and thief, stats and honey, or sorry, stats and bear, excuse me. Um, and if you go in too far in one direction, you could end up being just a basic bear and you're out of the game, or a thief and you're out of the game. It's very silly, and that's like the general kind of feeling you'll get from a lot of these TTRPGs. They can go from more serious games to more silly and goofy games, and you kind of have to pick and choose what you think is appropriate for your group.
So yeah, I added several more here too, because if there is a fandom, there is
Oh
probably
yeah.
a role-playing game associated with it. If you like Supernatural, if you like Supernatural, there's a role-playing game. They're even talking about they're even talking about like a Stranger Things version of D&D. There's folks that are like the Wizards of the Coast actually did a partnership with the Rick and Morty people, so there is official Rick and Morty D&D. So you if there is a fandom, and everybody knows their patrons the best, if they are into a thing, there is probably a role-playing game that can suit them. I called out specifically, some of the genres: Star Wars, Age of Empire, Adventures. If they like Avatar, The Last Airbender stuff. I also wanted to specifically call out No Thank You Evil. No Thank You Evil is specifically designed for, because you might want this as a program for kids, like younger kids. No Thank You Evil is a role-playing game specifically designed for younger children. And it's also designed to be modular. Everything you need comes in one box, and so it's modular. So the simplest thing: okay, I want to be a princess. Okay, so you're a princess. They get a little sheet that says what the princess is, and what the princess's powers do and what dice they roll. And then for the little older kids, they can still be the princess, but then they can be a cool princess, and then you get the cool modification on top of the princess. So then they have the cool powers and the princess powers, and then they have the super scientist princess. For like a teenager could play super scientist princess, and you add the super scientist on top of that. So the I like it because it grows. It grows with kids, but is also easy and accessible for especially for an all ages program. Fate is also very easy. Shadowrun can be a little more crunchy, but Shadowrun's like Dungeons and Dragons in the future. So there are elves, but there's also high tech cybernetics and magic. And Mutants and Masterminds is about being superheroes. And mainly for adults, the World of Darkness is like modern fantasy. This is for your like Twilight fans, or your Interview with a Vampire fans, where the players take on the roles of supernatural creatures hidden amongst humans, and those can be fun and accessible for again, that's more just, those are definitely designed for an adult audience.
Yeah. And going briefly into like the terms like crunchy and like soft games. Soft games are
Yeah,
like
yeah.
games that are games that are like uh much easier. There's a lot less setup and a lot less rules. And you can just kind of like get into it. And then crunchy games are like, all right, I played the softer games. I really like tabletop games, and now I want to get into something more difficult and challenging. And you'll find that there are like among your patrons, there'll be like different interest ranges, and so you kind of have to like gauge what's best for like the group you're kind of trying to run, because some people like really want to try something a lot more challenging, and some people just like, I just want to do something goofy and simple, and I want to just have like an easy like fantasy story and like not have to think as much about the rules, and I want to do a lot more talking, or I want to do a lot more improv in that moment. And so you kind of have to like gauge that level. We'll go a little bit more into that in the next few slides. All right. So you know you want to run a game at this point, and you're now like in the process of prepping for the game. So what do? You get a rule book, and you go through the rules and see if you both like the game, and again, if it's like appropriate for your group or your patrons. This is like the really important step because like you need to see if you think you can are comfortable with running it or comfortable with facilitating it because this is something a lot of tabletop games aren't just like a one-time deal. They can go over multiple sessions, and you need to be prepared to like, all right, I'm going to be in this game for a while, so I have to be comfortable and enjoy it. And once you've gotten that, you kind of work on either building a story for the game or picking a pre-built adventure. There are a lot of resources out there that let you like they've already made an adventure for you. And you just need to like gather those resources and be like, okay, I'm going to run this game. It has like rules to go through this story over these amount of sessions, and you can like gauge like uh when sessions will end and or like when your program will end. And then the thing that makes it a little bit more personal is that you can build your own story. One of the things I recommend if you're building a story for your game, um start with the antagonist or the thing that the heroes or players are trying to overcome. I found that is a little bit easier for building games. It just like it's a good way of like, okay, I know where I'm trying to get to, and I know how I want to get there, and I can help facilitate my players on getting into those story beats. I'm gonna jump to Errol. Do you have any suggestions on building games?
So here's the thing that I think is important for everybody who is considering running a program like this or even starting this up as a hobby. I think the important thing to really remember is there's no way to do this wrong as long as
Mhm.
everybody is having fun. All right.
Yep.
Because when you see this, if you see a big rule book, you're like, oh, this is so intimidating. A lot of people will tune out. They'll disassociate. They won't want to try it. And it can be intimidating. Um, the important part to remember is if people are having fun, you're doing it right. And if people aren't having fun, it is okay to say, okay, let's take a break. We'll come back. Like, what's not working? Like, you can talk to people. You don't have to have this, this aura of being invincibly, familiar with the rules. You can 100% tell people, hey, everybody, this is the first time I'm doing this. We're going to do our best to have a good time. If something gets messed up, or if you make a judgment call that maybe isn't 100% with the rules, doesn't matter. Hey, you know what? That's just the way it worked this time. All right. Yeah, I get that maybe the rule doesn't say it, but yeah, this is the way it's going to work this time. And then next time I'll look into it and we'll figure it out. Or if sometimes you do get we'll talk about it later, but sometimes you do get somebody who will know the rules better than you. And like, well, the rule works like this. And like, okay, well, then it's cool. Then that's fine if it works like that. And you can make that connection on the fly. Or if you want it to work differently that time, you can just say, well, for some weird reason, it's working like that this time. You know, the point is, don't be afraid. Don't be intimidated. Be confident. Okay.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And because as long as everybody's having a good time, there's no way to mess this up.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, I can't agree with that many more. Like
yeah.
that's a very good advice.
Yeah, the other thing I'm sorry, the other thing that I might
Go ahead.
mention is that yeah, a lot of times folks do the session zero where everybody makes their own character, and that can be fine. Just I've noticed when I run programs for libraries, sometimes you don't always get regulars, so you don't always have time to do that for everybody. For when I do Dungeons and Dragons programs for kids, adults might be different, but when I do Dungeons and Dragons programs for kids, I make all the characters. I make all the characters. I have everything ready to go, and I say, "Hey, look, what we've got is a paladin. Here's one of every class or whatever." And then I say, and if you want, you can, come in during the week or check out the book and make your own character, or whatever. And then next time you come, you can have your own character. So when we're doing this when we're doing this, that's usually the way like I deal with getting kids, especially some kid who just showed up and like, hey, I heard there was a D&D program, can I play? Like, we don't have time to sit around for an hour and make him a character. I just got to hand them a rogue, and he's got to get it, get into the game. And the same thing when you're choosing adventures, you want to try to keep your adventures, in my opinion, do as much serialization as you like. But in my opinion, I try to keep things episodic so that there's a whole one. Maybe it is part of a bigger story, but each session is as self-contained as we can, because there might only be somebody who's there for 1 week. It just as the price to doing business with library programs, so they can have the full experience.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway.
Yeah. So a lot of this is like just going through the basics of like running like a consistent game. But yeah, that's really good advice, because like especially having pre-built character sheets with you, or having pre-built like stuff for your patrons is really helpful. And a lot of this is about preparation, and then the actual program itself is improv and going like it goes a lot smoothly once you have all the preparation in place. One of the things I recommend is, if you know that you're going to have a consistent group of players, you might want to include their backstories in some way in the story. Even if it is like a pre-built adventure, you can try and like, since this is all improv, you can just like try and like add this in some place. Like, this character is now this character in someone else's backstory. When I'm talking about backstories, I'm talking about like players have written stories for their characters, and they have ideas for how the direction this character is going to go. It doesn't always go the way that they think, but it is a good way to like include some of that parts of it, so it makes the story feel more personal for them. Go ahead, Errol.
Yeah, like backstories are very simple. Like, before King Arthur was King Arthur, he was Wart the stable boy, under the tutelage of Sir Ector, and then he pulls the sword from the stone and becomes King Arthur. So that's the when we're talking backstory, like the time that King Arthur was Wart the stable boy, that's the backstory.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and then once you've done that, this is more for general like people who want a game master set time location. Since this is in the library, you'll have like probably a program time, and I would say keep that as consistent as possible. But I know that programs have to like sometimes get moved around. And then once you've done that, make sure you have all of the like stuff you need: dice, character sheets, the books, everything. Just make sure you always have that beforehand, so you're not like trying to like go look for something. You can run in game with just one set of dice. It becomes very hard, but you can do it technically.
Yeah, if you have the funding, I do recommend, especially if you have the money for giveaways, that you buy each participant, especially for kids program. For adult program, whatever, they have money, they can buy their own dice. But for you should always have loaners, even for adults who are just going to show up. But for kids program, go out and buy some dice. If you look on Amazon, there's a company called Wiz Dice. Wiz Dice, you can get like 30 sets of dice for like $1 a set. So it's probably about the most reasonable dice price for your money.
At this point, I'm just gonna like just double check within chat. Like, are there any like quick questions? Because I know we just talked a lot about like stuff, and I want to make sure no one's overwhelmed at the moment. I can't see chat, by the way, because I'm
no, nobody's saying anything. So great, let's roll out.
All right, cool. All right, so there's a bunch of different ways you can run the game. This is something I wanted to include because I feel like this is important because you don't necessarily need to run the game yourself. If you feel you want to do it and you have an idea of how you want to run the program, absolutely do it. But if you want to make this more of like kind of like a club kind of thing, you can actually let your teens or your patrons run the game. There's like different trade-offs for this. Running the game basically gives you more control of how like what kind of content they're they're doing. It's a lot easier, in my opinion, for teaching new players because you were the one like who knows the rules and you've gone through the rules and you're like, okay. Um, Especially with kids, like it's much easier to have an adult teaching kids for this kind of stuff than it is having other kids because they will go for like the optimal route or the more story driven route, and that might not always be what your players want to do. And especially, I would say if you're going to do an online session, I recommend doing it yourself. We'll go a little bit into like how to run an online game in a little bit later, but like this is if you're going to do that, you should run the game. And just like very brief aside, it's like easier to manage player disputes because you're there and you can be like, hey, um, I have the say in this, saying this. This is appropriate. This isn't appropriate. Stuff like that. Now, vice versa, letting your players and patrons run the game is a lot less work. You just have to facilitate the space. It gives, especially with kids and teens, it gives a lot more agency. It lets them develop those leadership skills of organizing themselves and setting up their time and scheduling. It just that is really good for doing that. But I would say definitely for let that be done for like teens per se than for like preteens and kids because it's a little bit easier to understand like explain the concept of like organization at that level from my experience. Errol, is there anything you want to add to that?
Uh, so yeah, this is Jonathan pretty much has this nailed down as the authority. Like the game master has a lot of authority at the table, and when you are the game master, it is easier. Like maybe we're not gonna. And there is a power to say no. Like I know there's a strong tradition for those of you who are already familiar with gaming. There's a strong tradition of like, oh, you just let the characters, let the players do what they want, and you just present the world. In the libraries, I don't do that. You are allowed to say no. He's like, no, we're not. You're not burning down the village and torturing all the peasants.
Right.
Like, at least in games that I run here, I'm like, everybody has to be a hero.
Wait.
We're not.
Arrow.
If you, yeah. I'm
I
sorry.
see
What's up?
there's a question in the chat. Have you had a chance to see that?
What,
Um,
what, what was the question?
yeah, I'm not sure what short-pilled means. Could you explain that again, Ayula? If you want to come on mic, go for it.
You said like something killed. I didn't quite catch it.
I
Like
did.
somebody did. I was driving, so I didn't quite hear it. It was something like
Okay.
about like the simplicity or like when you were explaining crunchy, like the different ways that the different forms that a role-playing game can take. I don't really remember.
Oh, yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Like just the differences between the varying differences between the varying levels of rules commitment. I'm not really sure what how what you heard because the term doesn't sound familiar to me. I'm so sorry.
I think they're talking about the going back earlier about the crunchiness versus softer games.
Okay.
And I think in this context, like if you're running I'm assuming I think I am understanding the question. Like if you're running a cruncher game, um, you might want to run it yourself. If you're running like a softer game, you might want to let them run it. Um, the it's a very much a matter of like what kind of group you have. I'm hoping that answered the question. I'm not. I didn't. I can't see the chat right now.
Yeah, it was short short pilled. It sounds like it's slang that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, I don't. I
uh,
don't. I don't. I don't know
yeah.
that one either. But
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think maybe we were hearing something odd. But yeah, so just for uh, that's okay, Iola. Don't worry about it. Just for the levels, you're gonna know your people the best. So it is possible to say no. especially for behavior, like, and that is something that you do have in your session 0, in your first session, or when you're onboarding a new person. Like, hey, we are playing heroes. Villainous actions will not be allowed. Player versus player interaction, like violent player versus player interaction. Like, you're not going to be, killing each other's characters. Like, it's okay to just say no.
I give I
Yeah.
give my players a gentle reminder every once in a while
Yeah.
when, like, hey, remember, you were playing good characters. We want to keep it in that direction. Just for, like, especially for preteens and teens, just because when I'm running like I'm only gonna run a heroic story with them where you're playing good guys. And so I'll be like, hey, let's not do this or not do that. And um, when it becomes, and I have like stuff explain this later in the slides, but like when it becomes like, hey, this is inappropriate, you just say so. Like that we hard cut from this, and this is not acceptable. Yeah, and we'll go on a little bit more into detail on that later. All right. So yeah, running the game in person versus running online. In-person games, in my opinion, are a lot easier to organize because everyone's there. You can talk to everyone. You don't need to do any setup in terms of technology. It's a lot easier for teaching purposes because you have the rules book right in front of you for the most part, and be like, hey, here's this rule. Here's this thing, so you can understand how your character or something in the game works. It super definitely allows players to be more creative in the session because they build things, they do things, and they'll show like what their characters are doing with like facial reactions, and I very much love that kind of stuff. So you might see like my preference in terms of like how I like to run games, and the tactile experience of rolling dice in person is fun. Like having a lot of dice hit the table. If like you in D&D, there's a spell called Fireball that lets you roll 8d6 for damage for hitting like a bunch of creatures when you're like fighting something in combat. And rolling all of those dice feels good, and it's a very fun experience. Um, Now, going to online games, you have a lot more resources for art. There are a lot of resources out there that just have like free art. Like for Pathfinder, there's a resource called Archives of Nethys that like you can just take their art from there because it's free. Um, there are a lot of services that are free. There's a lot of like things called virtual tabletops that allow you to run games in them. We'll go over a few of them. Some of them have like monetary costs to them. You kind of have to make a decision on whether or not you can like that will be within budget. And it's also good for a lot of players who, for some circumstance, can't make it into the library. If they're like just like some situation in their life just isn't, they just can't make it in, this is a really good alternative, and they've been using some of your online resources and they want to do these things but they just can't. Go to Errol.
Yeah, so this definitely has its ups and downs. Like the hero's journey, the hero's journey, all during COVID, the hero's journey was 100% virtual. So everything that we did was virtual, mainly on Discord. We just used Discord for the chat function and for dice rolling, and then they just used voice. The Discord voice features to talk to each other. So that is what, especially when we shut down for 2 years, 3 years, Heroes Journey had no live programs for 3 years. No in-person programs for 3 years, and that would have killed us if it that would have killed the organization if it weren't for things like Discord or Roll20 or stuff. And it did have advantages because we had kids that moved away from the area, but we're still using Discord to hang out with their friends. It can be, the online stuff can be a really great way to build a community. But like Jonathan said, like nothing substitutes the in-person substitutes for the in-person interaction, and we were very pleased when we were able to start it. So as always, you have to make your best choice as to what kind of programs you're going to be able to support at the library, and you know your people.
All right.
So yeah, so when you are looking at Dungeons and Dragons or any kind of gaming program, there are certainly challenges. Okay, so where to play, you need a spot. You need a spot where 5 to 7 people can sit down and not disturb the other people in the library. If you have a separate area, a separate program space, that's ideal, because people get into this. They get excited. They start shouting. Even adults can be like, "Oh, I rolled the highest possible roll. I got a critical hit," and adults will get excited about it. I get excited, like, "Yes, we did it!" And that is not, always appropriate for every space in the library. Finding when to play, part-time, if you're part-time staff, like fitting this in your schedule as the person running the program can be tough. Finding something like sometime when kids, if you're running a kids program, you got to run it after school or you got to run it on a Saturday. So finding that time, that ideal time. We switched. I used to have my teen program on Monday night, and it did well. But I wanted to do more adult programs on Monday night, and I switched it to like a Wednesday afternoon, and it killed the program. Teens just stopped coming; they could not come after school on a weeknight. Yeah, you have to figure out when the time is and how much work time. Because here's the thing: this is work. Like preparing a program is work. Even if you're like, oh, I'm reading a Dungeons and Dragons book, and I'm writing the adventure, like that might be a tough sell to a boss, like to a supervisor, like, hey, you need to give me, you want me to run this program. I want to run this program, but you're going to need to let me like prepare for 5 hours a week on the clock. Like you know, I deeply, deeply support the idea that people should get paid for their work, and just because what you're doing looks like fun doesn't mean it's not work. So like having that conversation with your supervisor, like, yeah, I need to get paid for 5 to 10 hours a week or however many, whatever, to prepare for this program. It's a conversation. And there is a monetary investment. Like if your library owns the books, you could just have the books. We, here at Somerville, we bought books just for like a reference collection. We have circulating copies of all the Dungeons and Dragons and some of the other role playing game books, but we bought reference copies as well, so that we would always have stuff in the thing. That's an investment. Buying the dice is an investment. If you're going to serve snacks, it's an investment. If you're going to use one of the paid virtual tabletops, that's an investment. It can run into money. There are ways to sort of offset that. I know Wizards of the Coast for a while. I'm not sure if they're still doing it. We should check into it again. But Wizards of the Coast was like offering like free materials. Wizards of the Coast is the company that makes Dungeons and Dragons. They were offering free materials for people who were, schools and libraries who were starting up a club. So you can look at their website and look into if they're still doing it. And if you're going to use your staff or your volunteers, sometimes getting in an outside volunteer that knows how to play the game is essential, and also recruitment and retention. So we have, and that works hand in hand with the final thing on my list here, which is time demand from after school programs. The schools are doing more and more. I'm sure you're all familiar with this if you're doing any programming whatsoever. The schools are doing more and more for the kids every day after school. Parents don't get out of work until 5:30. Kids get done with school at 2:30. After school care is a thing, but the schools are just kind of more also offering more programs, and so amongst those programs occasionally is Dungeons and Dragons. So sometimes it's for kids, it's hard to get the kids. So as always, for all of this, like you need to be able to articulate to your, like if you want to spend money, you need to be able to articulate with the people who are responsible for spending the money why it's important and why it's valuable. And hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit more. But you have to get, just like everything else, as you kind of get more involved in librarianship, being able to articulate clearly and passionately as to why anything we do is worth spending money on is a really important skill to get good at. So anyways.
Yeah. The one thing I will add to this, there are a lot of free options. Some things I do is if you can go online and if you have a computer with you for the program, um, you can do a quick Google search and search like, especially for D&D, 5e stats for like a monster, and a lot of times you can just find it online. Uh, as an IT, I would say be careful. Make sure you're looking at the website and look at the website safe. I'm just going to do that brief aside. But like even D&D Beyond, which is like one of the ones we'll use later on as an example, has like stats that are just free and you can just see them. And if you need something real quick, you can just be like, all right, I'm looking for mage stats 5e, and you'll find something like on there. So that's like another option if you want to like reduce costs by a little bit. So yeah, going into like virtual resources, there's a lot of them out there, and you can use this in combination with doing in person if you have a computer at like that's within reach of like a program room, or if you have like a laptop that you can use. Big one is D&D Beyond that's for D&D. They have a lot of resources. This can be a little. I know some of the stuff is paid for on there. There's some free stuff. So just be careful with this and see if you can properly fund this. Roll20 is a free service with an asterisk. It has a certain amount of data you can have on there that is for free, and as long as you keep on clearing out some of the old stuff you've been using, you can use this as long as you want, and it is free, and you just need to create an account. But if you think you need more data for more stuff, you have to pay a subscription fee. Um, Foundry is a one-time payment. It is $50, and that is it. You download it onto a computer, and you set it up. And you going into some of the technical stuff, you have to like sometimes open up a port on that computer in order to like let your players gain access. It depends on your network service. But for the most part, it is a one-time payment, and you just have it. And there's a huge community um, around using it, but it is a bit difficult to set up. And if you have more knowledge in terms of technology and in particular programming, you can use this. You don't necessarily need to have that because there's a big community out there that can just help you, but it is helpful to have some of that knowledge. We kind of talked a little bit more about Discord. That's a good for like if you're running online programs. That's a good way of organizing everyone. If you don't want to make what's in Discord called like a server, you can just run through like individual video calls by like getting everyone signed up for Discord and then calling them. You can have up to 10 people there in like one big call. um, that is like a one way to do it. Or if you feel comfortable enough with the technology, you can just set up a server and have as many people as you want. You'll just have to do a lot of management to make sure you can control who is and isn't coming into the Discord server. Um, Zoom, obviously, is another good way. That's like also paid. If you're not like paying for it, you're only like restricted to like 50-minute calls, or like doing the thing where you have someone else become the host. So I would say like this is a choice. Another one is if you have like in the Google workspace and you have that experience, you can use Google Chat. Even without the workspace, it would just limit the number of people you can have in that call. I think it's 6 or 7. I can't remember. I haven't done that without the workspace in a while. But that is another resource out there. TTRPG wikis are super helpful if you're trying to build worlds or build games. Um, be careful. Some of this stuff is dated in the sense like it's just not current with what the different groups are doing. Um, so just be careful with the content from there and just do some research on like, okay, is this correct and up to date? And then Tabletop Simulator is another good one if you want to if you have access to a Steam account, you can download that. And I this is in my opinion, the most challenging one because you need to do a lot of setup, but a lot of content on there is free. So once you've like bought Tabletop Simulator, makes a lot of stuff simpler. So there's a lot of like cost benefit analysis that you need to like go into to figure out which resource you think is the most valuable. I say the big one out of this list is Roll20. That facilitates a lot of stuff if you're doing games virtually, and Foundry, which I'm going to go into a little bit later on what those look like. I think Errol, you have another slide about more resources next. Nope, never mind. Errol, is there anything you want to add to this list?
If people want to unmute to ask a question, please go ahead and do
John,
that.
you're real muffled.
Oh, I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
It's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. What's the Google Meet? Okay, so Google Meet, Google Meet has a basic. You could run the call for 24 hours for free if you have a 501c3 charity. They'll do it. They'll give you the basic level for free if you have a C3 charity. The reason I mention it in this context is maybe it's a good idea for a partnership with your friends. If your friend's organization wants to kind of lend their name to that, you do the sponsorship with them. You can get the 24-hour duration video calls from Google Meet with a fairly easy to do communication with Google. I did it for the Hero's Journey because it's a C3. So it was relatively painless. You might have to hold their hands a little bit, but we're kind of used to that. Sorry, go ahead, John.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure you can still hear me right now, right?
Yeah, you were good. I think your mic was covered or something.
Yeah. Room's not the best internet, so if I cut out again, I apologize. No, that's pretty much it. Now I was gonna go jump into Roll20 and Foundry and like talk about that. So let's move over there. So yeah, this is a brief screenshot of Foundry. This is basically this is like one of the encounters I ran a while back. This is just like to give you like what it generally looks like. I don't have the other side because that has too much personal information that I didn't want to show. But on the right side, there's a whole bunch of tabs for different like settings, including like managing maps, managing combat, managing counters, managing like the rule books and the content that you have. There's a lot of things you can do with Foundry, a lot of customization. If you can barely see it in here, I actually have a rain animation in this particular encounter, which I added just to add a little bit more ambiance to like the particular session I was running. There's a lot of tools in these VTTs or virtual tabletops. You can see there's a measuring tool. There's ways to manage objects, manage different lighting effects, and player vision. Foundry has a lot of controls for player vision. You might have to mess around with them a little bit, but it's really helpful for um, setting up like a more immersive experience. I recommend Foundry a lot. You need to have the knowledge and like and mess around with it. It is again one-time payment and huge community in terms of like helping you set up. I went through like setups like for new games like pretty quickly. Like when I ran Lancer for the first time through Foundry, it took like an hour, and I was like, wow, all right.
So, John, just so you know, we have about 7 minutes. So,
All right. I will go very briefly through Roll20 because I'm not going to say much more than I kind of already said. It's a free setup service. It's got very similar like mechanics to how Foundry works. It's got a little bit less in terms of resources. You have the measuring tool, you have the way to manage objects, but the way managing player vision is kind of just like you have to highlight and remove stuff, so you don't have as much choice. But the thing is, it is free, and so that is still a good resource out there, especially if you're not as committed to running online games. And it is, yeah, as like have written here, very easy to use. Like once you've like practice it with like I would say 15 minutes, you kind of get the idea. All right, so we'll go quickly over some like helpful advice. We kind of talked about a lot of this throughout the entire entire slides. Make sure to have everything beforehand. The one I haven't said a lot of is be aware of players who have a lot of knowledge about the game. They can both be a resource for you, and they might also can be a problem because they're like, I know how this monster works. This will do this, this, and that, and this goes into like stuff we've said before. Like you set the tone of the game, and you set how the game is done, especially if you're running the game. So if you have something different than what the rules say, I mean that's how you're running the game versus how someone else would. So it is your choice in that sense. We kind of already talked about how the game is collaborative. So if you have an issue, as like Errol said earlier, and you feel like it didn't go well, talk to your players, or even if you think it's going well, just do a quick checkup with your players and be like, hey, are you having fun? What do you guys think? Is there something we can change? If there's like a player that's quiet, maybe do like a one-on-one with them and be like, hey, are you having fun? Just a quick checkup. Stuff like that. And yeah, big thing in my opinion is be prepared to say no. If there's something inappropriate, unacceptable at the table, you don't have to do it. That is super big. Like don't let feel pressured into doing anything because it's rules is written or it's somewhere else in like the game. Just you can say no. And then yeah, don't like once you're there, it's all improv. It's all like it's supposed to be a fun experience. So like you don't have to overthink it too much. Like just run it and run it the way you want to run it. Errol's anything you want to add real quick?
Nope.
All right.
So I'm
All
going
right.
to get through this as quick as I can. So D&D is, especially a lot of these games, characters solve problems with violence. That is just a thing. However, and that can cause, especially, a lot of conversations we're having in the library world right now. So the important part when you're having this conversation is that a lot of these rules systems also have ways for non-lethal combat, or as the person doing the storytelling, you can suggest like, hey, look, yeah, these are bandits, but maybe you could capture the bandits and turn them into the authorities or something like that. So being prepared to have the content conversation is important. These are also games that involve magic, and there are segments of the population who object to magic being used or mentioned. People who object to various kinds of for religious reasons, and being prepared, like this magic isn't real. It's in the same kind of fantasy. It's in the same kind of fantasy realm as Lord of the Rings or anything. It's a conversation that doesn't come up that often anymore, but it still comes up. And of course, religion, where there are characters in the game that follow imaginary religions. Basically you avoid the whole problem by, nobody is a paladin of Jesus, like
Yeah.
occasionally we do get people who will want to be a cleric or a paladin of a real of a real world religious figure, a real world religion. We just cut it all out and say, we don't, out of respect for real world religions, we don't bring that kind of stuff into the game. And just you all know, we all know, hopefully know how to have difficult conversations with patrons when we're addressing these. Just stressing the imaginary false and nature, and stressing that all the characters are good guys and that there are non-lethal options can help. All right, you want to move on?
Yep.
All right, so the last thing that probably that I'm going to have, like, getting this approved as a program. Okay. So, and that can be, you need to be able to get buy-in from supervisors and stakeholders. And there are benefits for it. I sort of mentioned a few earlier. It really helps with long-term retention, but also it's a tab. You at the beginning of your session, you can be like, hey, what are you folks reading? Any good books? Are there any books that we should have? Are there any programs you'd like to see? So suddenly your D&D program is your tab. And we've done that for years. And also the same thing for adults. You can find out what adults are thinking by talking to them. So it's a book club. Hey, you liked Dungeons and Dragons? Well, here's a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons novels that I bought, or here's some more fantasy novels. You can recommend them. We talked about when you're talking to stakeholders, you can mention the valuable skills that it teaches, including for ESL. Like there's stories about like you had students that were less good with English participating as elves who only spoke Elvish, and in that game, Spanish was Elvish. All right, so when the person was talking in Spanish, that's what Elvish sounded like on that planet. And then some of the people in the group who were bilingual, who were the half elves, or who just were bilingual, were able to provide translation for the elf, and that welcomed this person in, and also help them work on their ESL skills. And it's also a tool to motivate particular behaviors. And the way I mentioned that is like, hey, everybody, if you check out a book today, I will give you 10 gold pieces for the game. Or if you attend one of the other programs, like, hey, we're having an arts and crafts program. If you go to the arts and crafts program, I'll give you a healing potion for Dungeons and Dragons. It costs you $0. They go to the program, you give them the healing potion. You get, maybe you work out a point system where if they get 100 points, they get a magic sword. Like which costs you $0. Just lets you drive programs into drive people into other programs. I've done it for adults. Like hey, I'll give you some healing potions if you come to this local history program. And a couple of people have shown up. So when you're selling this to supervise, you like, this is how you tie it into other the way you get approval, in my opinion, is you tie it into other library services. How can you use this to feed into other library services? You want to hit it again?
Yep.
I don't know if it was... All right. So since it's 3:00, we don't want to keep people. I run a 501c3 charity. It's called the Hero's Journey Inc. Basically, their mentorship program, where we sort of help kids, learn skills that we've been talking about. We partner them with adult volunteers. We get the adult volunteers, background checks, so we know that they're safe to be around kids. And we run programs in partnership with local organizations. We are growing. I don't know how many of you there. I can't say I'll be able to find you somebody who'll be able to come down and run Dungeons and Dragons for free at your library, but feel free to reach out to me there. I also included the Wizards of the Coast website. I mentioned the links to the free materials. That link is in there. Also, there's a really great YouTube channel called The Dungeon Dudes. If you are looking into running a program, watch the Dungeons Dudes, because they have a whole series of how to run Dungeons and Dragons, how to play Dungeons and Dragons, and they're really two super positive, welcoming guys, and they have a lot of great philosophies. I deeply recommend them. And this link, this final link that you see, and you'll all get a copy of the presentation, but this final link is a link to a Google Drive that I maintain of a bunch of Dimension 20 is wonderful too, Angela.
Oh yeah, they're great. They're so great.
This Google Drive folder has a bunch of free family-friendly role-playing games. So these are games that they are, they're copyrighted, but they are free to distribute, free to duplicate, free to use, of varying kinds. And you can all feel free to just access that, copy it, spread it around. And there's a bunch of fun role-playing games that are, like, again, if you are really on a shoestring, that's a great source for fun, family-friendly games. So yeah, I agree. Like Dimension 20 really isn't for kids. Their use of language is a little unrestrained. I also sometimes I'm a little afraid that like things like Critical Role in Dimension 20, where like talented voice actors and comedians play these games and look really professional, and people who are a little bit more awkward like feel intimidated by that. So like while they're great, they might not be the best. Like, yeah, watch this if you want to know what D&D is like. The Dungeon Dudes run a live play where it's much more it's much more true to what a real D&D session would look like if you watch their like Dungeons of Drakenheim live play, where they wear like goofy costumes, but they're just like regular guys, regular folks. So uh, it's much more like not Matt Mercer, much more regular person.
I think it's definitely good to be aware that those people are out there and be
Yeah.
and like think like because like a lot of kids are going to come in like knowing that, and always be comfortable to say I'm setting the tone for how I run my game. Like I know I have a different style than most other game masters, so I am comfortable in that vein. And if someone tells me like, well, why don't you do it like this? I'm like, well, I do it this way, and that is how we run these games. And it's just this is the way I run games because I'm different than other game masters that are out there. Just like you will have, if you're running, you will have your own style, and you'll find that very early on.